All right, thanks so much, everyone. So I am back up here to introduce our human rights panel, which, as I said, today's final panel. This panel is featuring Iqra Salah of UC Berkeley Graduate School of Journalism, Zane Irwin of Swarthmore College, Vildana Khamidullina of LaGuardia Community College, Natalia Perez Gonzalez of Syracuse University, Hana Ahmed, one of our 2022 Justice Fellows, and Serena Wu of Washington University in St. Louis. So that said, Iqra, I'll hand it over to you.
Hi, my name is Iqra. I'm from UC Berkeley Graduate School of Journalism. And I just realized all of you have like really good presentations, and yeah, I just need to keep up. But yeah, during the summer I went to Zimbabwe. Initially how I came across the story was I'm originally from Kenya, and so there's a tribe called the Shona people who were given citizenship in Kenya. And I was just doing that story, and I came about just learning more about these people and just learning more about Zimbabwe. And I came, across this story, being stateless. So in Zimbabwe, there are approximately 300,000 people, according to Amnesty International, people who were stateless. And I know for a lot of people being stateless, when you can't even fathom about it. So it's like lack of an identification card, So these are people who were born in Zimbabwe but don't have any identification card. And that brings a lot of problem. Like you cannot access housing, healthcare, education, anything. You can't really function. So yeah, bit of background. So I think the story starts back in the 1800s, where there's this group of people called the Dembele who came from South Africa, and they were pushed out of South Africa by the Zulu and the Boers, and they came and settled in Zimbabwe. And they're sort of like the minority in Zimbabwe. And they're and I don't know, as an outsider, when I got there, you could really feel the tension. I'm not saying like there's any conflict or anything, but the Shonas were the majority, and the Dembele who came from South Africa, you can always tell like who's the majority and who's the minority. And so I spent like 3 weeks in Matabeleland and the province of Midlands, just meeting a lot of people and talking to them and just trying to understand like how they got themselves into such a situation. So statelessness is brought about by two things. One of them is there's a massacre that happened back in the 80s, and this was when the then Prime Minister, Robert Mugabe. So after independence, there were two people who fought for, there were figures who fought for independence. So that's Joshua Nkomo and Robert Mugabe. So Robert Mugabe belonged to ZANU PF, and Nkomo belonged to ZAPU. So the prime minister was Mugabe, and then the minister, he was given a ministerial position, that was Joshua Nkomo. And I don't know, Mugabe felt like this guy was trying to overthrow him, and he wanted to sort of like silence him. And and sort of like Mugabe launched the final phase of his plan to sort of like, according to people that I talked to turn Zimbabwe into one-party state. And he sent the North Korea-trained 5th Brigade, called the Gukurahundi, in Shonaland, which is where I was, to sort of like silence them, because he was calling them like dissident. But this escalated and turned into 4-year ethnic cleansing spree against the Ndebele people a lot of people were killed. I think an estimation of 220,000 to 100,000 people were killed. So there's that. And then the other group of people is people who came from Southern African countries during colonial period to come and work in farms. And so the people who are stateless right now are people who sort of don't have, like, they were born in Zimbabwe, but they have not been recognized. And it dates back to the constitution where people from Southern African countries were not legally allowed to get citizenship. So this is sort of like some of the quotes of people who are survivors of the massacre. And this is, I was just talking to people, I just realized I don't have time. So these are the people who I met, I met amazing, amazing people who cannot function, they have kids who cannot go to school, they can go to school, but they cannot register for exams, because for you to register for exams, you need a birth certificate. And I think one of the greatest obstacles is the government has not been able to issue like death certificates, because issuing that certificate is actually saying that you committed the atrocities. And it's really interesting because the only statement that has come out from the government is, I think in 1999, when Nkomo died and Mugabe described the event sort of like a moment of madness, and no one has ever spoken about it. And the current president in Zimbabwe, he was, I think, Minister of Security or something, so you can understand like the tension. So yeah, this is sort of some of the quotes of talking to people, just saying, we don't feel like we're humans, we can't go to school, we cannot work, we cannot access healthcare and stuff like that. And yeah, so my story, I'm writing a story. Initially I wanted to do a documentary, but it was really hard for me to do it. And I met this amazing man. His name is Moyo. He's a traditional leader and sort of like a figure, very well respected. When you meet him, you don't think much about him, but he sort of like advocates for people. And for someone to get citizenship in Zimbabwe, you need the backing of this guy. This guy has to sort of like vouch for you. But the catch is he's also looking for a birth certificate for his grandson. So his son went to South Africa to look for jobs. But then again, when he came back, life got hard. He came back and his kids were born in South Africa and they cannot be, Zimbabwe citizen. But that is contrary to what the Constitution, the 2013 Constitution says. So you can get citizenship by dissident or like continuation of restoration of previous citizenship. So the grandchildren are supposed to be citizens. And yeah, so current efforts, the government launched in 2021 a national registration blitz. Initially they said they are targeting 2 million people. I think a week ago they came out with a statement, said that they have actually registered 300 million. I've been speaking to people and they're like, that's the government just saying that there's no one to hold them accountable to actually like investigate these figures. So people are really doubtful if they're really saying the truth. And yeah, that's the end. This was me and Moyo just hiding from security and doing an interview on that tree. An amazing guy. Yeah, thank you.
Hello, I am Zane. I use he and pronouns. I'm from Swarthmore College, and after studying abroad in Cameroon for a semester, I did a Pulitzer Center reporting project about the role of social media in Cameroon's Anglophone crisis, which, for lack of a better term, is an ongoing civil war. So here's a bit more about me. The most important part of this slide is Florette Mandong, right there. She was my reporting partner who I hired to help show me the ropes, which was important not just to understand what it's like to be a Cameroonian journalist, because that was a part of my area of interest or research, but also so that I understood some of the different practices and norms of journalism in a context that's unfamiliar. So the first story that I did of two, I'm calling Fire in the Comments section. It's both an article and a video that focus on one incident that really showcases the way that social media is used to kind of like flood the zone and spread chaos and confusion in this conflict by both sides. I will let the video, which I kind of stitched together using social media clips, I'll let that do a lot of the explaining. But yes, let's go.
The incident started at 9 o'clock. We had gunshots, so we didn't really know what was happening. So it was about 2 hours later, that's about 11, that we got information that the hospital has been set ablaze.
It's June 8th, 2022. Unknown attackers have burned down the Memphi District Hospital in Cameroon, and social media users are broadcasting the devastation in real time. A UN statement reports no immediate casualties, but it emphasizes that this loss will leave a staggering number of people without adequate health care. The attack is shocking, but it isn't all that surprising. The Memphi District Hospital is in the southwest region of Cameroon, one of 2 areas where a civil war known as the Anglophone Crisis has been playing out since 2017. Homes, schools, and hospitals in this part of the country are regularly destroyed as part of the fighting. There are 2 main parties to this conflict. On one side, we have English-speaking militants rebelling against decades of marginalization by the Francophone majority. They want to leave Cameroon and create a state called Ambazonia. On the other side is Cameroon's state military, determined to strike down the independence movement. For the last 5 years, atrocities committed by both sides have displaced over 1 million Cameroonians and killed thousands of civilians. In the weeks and months since the arson, an obvious question hangs in the air. Who did it? The UN report blamed a non-state armed group for the attack, referring to the Anglophone separatists. But on the internet, where many first heard about the incident, the verdict wasn't so clear.
The government accusing separatists and separatists accusing government.
Burnt the hospital. Separatists were responsible. We still don't know.
They were military. Definitely cannot say.
Separatist government propaganda.
There were no state
Fake news, propaganda, misinformation.
disinformation.
Emmanuel, you know if you go permanent, I see the kind thing, so
This is the only facility we have here in Memphi, and people have put it down ablaze.
Still, no one has claimed responsibility for the act, which means the tens of thousands of people whose lives are affected are without a clear answer or a way to hold the perpetrators accountable.
People are still in agony, people are still crying, people are still in disbelief that a health facility will be damaged at this pertinent period.
This video is part of a project, Parallel Wars, the power of social media in Cameroon's...
The incident started at 9 o'clock.
That's not correct. Yes, so that is the video that accompanies the article. And now it's in that mode. It's all good. Oh, okay. Well, yeah, I might need some help. I can still talk. Yeah, so I'm kind of a techno-pessimist. Like Jackie's project earlier talked about, social media can be a double-edged sword. Yes, I tend to think that one edge of that sword is sharper than the other. But in the article, I do talk about the potential of social media to bring light to underreported issues, especially in this crisis. It's been instrumental in reporting kind of war crimes on both sides. But that being said, my second story is about social media kingpins. I'm gonna publish this one once I write it in African Arguments, which is an online Pan-African publication. And I want to bring you into this story the way that I discovered it by accident. I reached out to this, who I thought was a citizen journalist slash activist, blurry lines there, who was a separatist, an Anglophone separatist supporter. He was lying about who he was. And I found that out a little late, the day of the interview. And I scrambled to change the location to a public setting, and I told people where I was just for safety. And I went into this interview bracing myself to pretend I didn't know this guy was a fraud. Thankfully, the first thing he said was, "I am not this person that you think I am." And for the next 4 hours, he told me how he poses as an Anglophone separatist supporter to lure people in, and the long and short of it is kill them and their cause. He runs an international online network that aims to use the same tactics of radicalization, disinformation, propaganda, his words, not mine, that Anglophone separatists sometimes use against them. He was the victim of a ransom attack by separatist-affiliated groups. In 2018, his family was almost killed, and he used that anger to create this online movement he calls MKPD, which, it's more than disinformation. It's more than posing as an activist, which I also interviewed the person he is impersonating. It's more than that. I mean, he talked about breaking eggs to make an omelet. I asked him, do you care if you accidentally place a hit on somebody who's innocent? And he said, no, this is war. He lives in the UK. So does the activist that he's impersonating. And they both, send WhatsApp messages and tweets and Facebook posts that mislead people generally and kill people specifically. So yes, I'm extremely thankful to the Pulitzer Center for this opportunity. I have so much more to say about this, so please ask questions in person. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Vildana Khamidullina. I'm a current student at LaGuardia Community College, and thanks to Pulitzer Center, this summer I had a chance to go to my homeland, Russia, and report on sex education. Before I start, I wanted to tell you how I was doing my research before going there, and it was funny because I was talking to people and some were joking, well, I can write the story for you. There's no sex education in Russia, that's it. But I decided not to give up on that and try to dig a little bit more, and this is what I came up with. So my focus fell on two parts, which is HIV epidemic and LGBTQ discrimination. In 2021, official report stated that HIV epidemic got to the point that there's 1.5 million registered positive people. And Russia is a very known country for being discriminated towards LGBTQ community. And as of today, there's a lot of sanctions falling in Russia, and I thought that there's a possibility of sexual orientation confusion and possible related suicide rise, which actually already increased by 13% in the last 3 years. So the first part of my project was HIV, and I had a great opportunity to speak to two activists. One of them was Maria Godlevska. She's a 30-year-old woman who is a mother of a 9-year-old son, and she has an open HIV status since 1998. So she found out about it when she was a teenager, but she calls herself lucky because at that time there were only 4,000 people registered in St. Petersburg. Ever since then, she decided to help other people who are finding out about their status, and she became an activist. As of today, she is working in a fund called Yeva, and she is pretty well known in Russia for giving lectures to people to educate them how to make the first steps if you find out about your positive status, or how to prevent getting an HIV. But when I asked her about her lectures to underage kids, she said that it's almost impossible, or if you get an approval, it's almost like walking on the edge. But in fact, when she had an opportunity to talk to the teenagers, she said that they're pretty amazing and they're open-minded. There's a lot of things to talk to with them. The only highlight she had is about teenagers from poverty-stricken families, because sometimes they tend to have a choice of contraception or food. So another activist I was talking to is Denise Kurakin. He's actually 47 years old, and he found out about his HIV status in 2015. He used to be a Moscow musician, but he had to stop because at the moment when he found out about his status, he already had AIDS, and he had to be hospitalized. When he was telling me about the stories in the hospital, it was honestly terrifying how people would come in and within hours just pass away and other people would come to replace them. So that experience of his triggered him to become an activist and open his own fund and become a writer, which he does till this day. And when I asked him about HIV epidemic in Russia, he said that he believes non-governmental organizations are trying to help and bring awareness, but until government is not going to get involved, it's not going to be enough. So you can see Maria Godlevskaya and Denise Kurakin, and these are the highlights which I pointed for myself. Maria said that activists, she believes that sex education in Russia is not just sex and awareness of contraception. It is much deeper, such as understanding of yourself, and it should be discussed on social, psychological, and emotional levels. And Denise mentioned that in Russia, people still believe that HIV is a disease of gay people, drug addicts, and prostitutes, when in fact all of the communities are affected now. So when Maria told me about psychological side, I started to wonder in my mind, is she telling the truth or not? So I decided to research a little bit deeper and find some psychologists. So I had a chance to speak to Raisa Gorina and Victoria Kosova. About Raisa Gorina, she's a psychologist consultant, and she's a current member of Sexologists Association in Russia. And she was actually very in solidarity with Maria, because she also believes that sex education is a complex and sensitive topic, and it could bring complications for the government to properly implement the program, which could affect families and society. And Victoria Kosova, for me, as a journalist, was as killing two birds with one stone, because she identifies herself as a bisexual, and she used to work in school as a therapist. When I asked her what was her biggest concern regarding teenagers, she said that while working with children, families of these kids are not in any rush to speak to the therapist on sexual orientation. That being said, I'm moving on to my second part of the project, which is LGBTQ. I had a chance to speak to 3 activists in Moscow and St. Petersburg. One of them was Ksenia Maximova, who is my age, 25 years old. She's an open lesbian who was born and raised in Moscow. And when we started talking to her, I asked what disappoints her the most about the discrimination. And she said that at that day, she was so mad that the government showed that homosexual relationships and pedophilia could be on the same level. That bill was introduced in July 18, 2022, which actually affected my search. People were a little bit scared to talk to me. And she was very concerned about future of LGBT community, especially the physical violence. And she was more worried about males than females. Which brings me to another person I spoke to, Oleg Ustrinsky. He's an open gay, and he used to live in St. Petersburg up till last 2 weeks. He had to move due to the war. He suffered physical violence in St. Petersburg a few years back, and he told me that it felt like it's unfair. He couldn't understand why. But when he was talking about his childhood, I started asking him how he realized that he's gay and what is his sexuality. He said that it was very natural for him. He was 12 years old, and he was growing in a very small town, which is surprising, Nivynemisk. The only support which he was seeking, it was from online. So he would read sometimes if, okay. So he would read sometimes some information as a normal teenager, such as Sergei Derevanchiko, who's also been seeking for information online, but he was actually confused. He only found out about his sexuality at the age of 16. But he's really great that internet was in access at that time. But nowadays with the sanctions and the war, they're closing down the websites and social media, so all of them are actually concerned about the youth, that they're not going to be able to have a chance and read it. And the country is so conservative that it could lead to bad outcomes. So these are the activists, Ksenia, Oleg, and Sergei. And some highlights. Ksenia said the problem with Russia is that they do not share the orientation and some kind of prevention. From Oleg, he said, it will be a giant abyss for children. They will not understand what is happening to them. And Sergei said sexual education is already thrown into a stone age in Russia. As long as that power remains, everything will remain the same. So I'm really glad that I've done this project and I didn't stop on there is no sex education in Russia, because I found so many stories from people, and I'm so glad that they're still contacting me and updating on what's going on. And actually that bill in July, since yesterday, LGBTQ is officially illegal in Russia with underage and adults. So thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. My name is Natalia Perez Gonzalez. I am a recent graduate from Syracuse University, and my project was on Afrofeminists and the reproductive rights movement in the Dominican Republic. So, quick overview. The project I originally pitched because my angle did change, and I'll get into that. But I had been set on producing this project following the popular feminist movements and organizations in the fight for exceptions to the country's abortion ban. And I'd interview gynecologists, sex educators, activists to get the fuller scope of the social climate and the context. And for background on me, I am Dominican and Puerto Rican, and so I follow certain politics in both countries really closely, especially in regards to Afro-Latinos. I believe that Black Latin America is generally grossly underreported, and that's in large part what led me to this story. So here is a short story in numbers. We're going to quickly break down the Dominican climate towards women and birth givers and why this story is important. So firstly, the Dominican Republic is one of the 4 Latin American countries that still has a total abortion ban. DR also ranks among the highest for maternal mortality and teen pregnancy. And to put this a bit into perspective, the teen pregnancy stat, in the United States, 16 out of 1,000 teens give birth. In Latin America, it's 60 out of 1,000. In the Dominican Republic, it's 91 out of 1,000. And honestly, the culture that fuels this is its own project in itself. It was just last year that child marriage became illegal in the country. So there's really just a whole social fabric that tethers this together. And thirdly, it has the second highest rate in Latin America for femicide, with Honduras being the first and El Salvador being third. Both of these countries also have a total abortion ban, and that is an interesting point of exploration. And lastly, only 7% of the population receives sex education in school, and the rest is really left up to the mercy of their teachers. So a short timeline of what led down to this I'm gonna break this down real quick. So in the spring of 2020, ignore my fall typo, it's the spring, there were elections happening, there was a new presidential candidate that was campaigning, and he had promised that he would he would work to amend the restrictive abortion ban, which was written in a penal code that has not been revised since the 1800s. But after he steps in to office, he softens his stance to appeal to conservative voters and religious voters, which have the most political power in the country. So a lot of people are angry and betrayed, and they're feeling let down by their government once again. And so in 2021, protests ensue. They start around March. One of the main feminist movements in Santo Domingo, which is the country's capital, is called Las Tres Causales, which translates to the three causes or the three exceptions to abortion in regards to a woman or birth giver being allowed access to an abortion when their life is at risk or they were raped or there's in cases of incest. So this group of people, they decide they're going to apply pressure. They camp out in front of the president's palace and they protest every day for about 3 months. It was the first time in a long time that I've ever seen DR so covered internationally and get so much of our national media attention. In the end, Las Tres Causales were unfortunately not passed, but from my interviews, so many shared with me that there has been a lot of increased social consciousness and awareness towards their plight. So this is an important pivotal point for me in my reporting. After meeting the women in this picture, it was when I instantly knew I had to switch my angle and approach. I came into this, as I said, focusing on the feminist movement as a whole, but Afrofeminism in DR is so rich and vast and illuminates a whole new set of issues. I had to confront my westernized American mentality and way of approaching this. I was trying to examine the data and explore what's lacking through an institutional context and using that data to explore what's lacking to unearth more context. But this project really demanded that I step out of that. And these women shared a completely different side of the story with me. They shared their disconnect from the mainstream feminist movements, how their unique needs of their community weren't taken into consideration because, again, the movements are based in mostly Santo Domingo, where people generally have more access and more privilege. And the narrative when covering abortion in DR usually goes like, oh my gosh, these women, their rights are being taken away and they have no choice but to resort to these dangerous, clandestine forms of abortion. And not to say that that doesn't happen and that it's a non-issue, because it still definitely is, but rarely does coverage position them as people with agency, people who are incredibly resourceful because they've had to be. Many of them have done abortions at home safely without needing permission from the state. And the issue, from what they shared with me, is less about the abortion ban and more about the overall lack of sex education and of complete disconnect from their bodies and how they work. So as Esther said in the quote, we see many women on the front lines talking about how they're leading the fight for poor women. But where are the poor women? What place do rural, working class women in the country have in the construction of this strategy? They say things like, we're here to speak for those who do not have a voice, but perhaps it's not that they don't have a voice, it's that the feminist movement isn't listening to them. And so, after Latino erasure, in my pre-reporting process, I had a couple of interviews where some sources straight up told me that there isn't really a difference between struggles for Black women and non-Black women in the country, and that there's a universality to the gender struggle. As a Dominican woman, I know that anti-Blackness plagues our communities and its systems perpetuate a complete denial of our Blackness, and in so doing completely ignore and discredit the needs and experiences of its most impoverished communities and the ones who receive the harshest punishments of these laws and restrictions. So as my visual shows, 82% of Dominicans are Afro-descendant, yet they are taught to deny themselves at their own expense, and only 7% actually identify as Black. Which is why I brought my focus from just Dominican feminism as a whole to specifically Black Dominican feminism. And I'm gonna show a very short clip for the safety of time. Oop, it is, okay. Yeah.
propio cuerpo, porque tenemos dignidad, porque somos sujetos del Estado, que tenemos una voz. Ahora mismo la Comisión de Justicia y la Cámara de Diputados son solo hombres y no nos representan. Entonces yo estoy aquí para defender mis derechos.
Por ti, por todas las mujeres y las niñas, porque se acabe la inconsciencia, porque no muera ni una más a punta de la inconsciencia de los ineptos. Por favor, las causales van. Oño.
That is a short clip of my trailer for this project. And yeah, just want to say thank you to the Pulitzer Center. This is an incredible opportunity. Also, thank you to my cinematographer who's in the audience, and thank you to all of you for listening.
Hi everyone, I'm Hana. I started a master's in journalism at Northwestern Medill, but have since transitioned into med school in Chicago. Thank you everyone for being here for such a long day and staying attentive and engaged. But yeah, the premise of my story is essentially looking at a legal principle known as the theory of accountability and looking at it through the lens of Iqra, who is a woman that has been incarcerated since 2010 because she was prosecuted under such theory. So this is Iqra. She's currently 40 years old. Like I said, she's been incarcerated since 2010. She's a single mother and really a model person, human being, also a model inmate. But yeah, she has essentially, she became a paralegal while she's been incarcerated, and she does countless things that help her peers and that keep her community engaged. Like I'll show you guys later on, she has helped countless women that are her peers get their court dates on time, like with the knowledge that she has as a paralegal, and she has also really kind of helped that community stay together and feel empowered. So the theory of accountability essentially is what you think of when you think of accomplices to a crime. What it means is that prosecutors, when they use the theory of accountability, regardless of whether or not someone actually committed the crime, if they can prove that they were proximate enough to the commission of the crime, they can be charged for the whole thing. So Iqra was charged for murder and armed robbery, even though everyone in that courtroom on the jury panel, the judge, everyone knew that she didn't actually do it, but she's serving a 42 and 22-year concurrent sentence, with her earliest release being 2049. And that would put her almost at 70 years of age. And so my entrance into this story is essentially during her post-conviction petition, which is essentially she went through her trial, she went through her appeal, and this is after being incarcerated for a while. She was able to petition the judge to release or remand her sentence. And so she did this on two accounts that were accepted out of, I think, 4. One of them was A, an armed robbery might have never happened, and B, there was essentially a miscarriage of justice in her original trial because her original trial attorney, she says, didn't present her a deal and rejected it without her knowledge, which, if you know about our legal system, that's a violation of due process. But really quickly, the story of what happened at her trial is that Iqra was working part-time. She was a part-time student and then working part-time at a restaurant known as Leona's. And she got into some kind of tussle with her manager, who was like telling her not to wait a certain table, but she wanted to do it. And then he called the higher-ups came, and then she ended up getting fired as a result of that. So when she left, she told her foster brother, previous foster brother, that this has happened, and she was upset. And he was like, "Would you like us to go beat him up?" And she was upset, and she said, "Yeah." And so what happened is, so she drove them to the restaurant, he picked up a couple of friends, and she waited in the car, and they went inside. But little did she know that one of the friends that they had picked up had a gun, and things were going to go wrong very quickly. So when they got back into the car, the victim, Corey Ebenezer, had been shot, and there had been chaos in the restaurant, with cash registers being unaccounted for and money questionably maybe being stolen. And then as you go on, she ends up getting tried for this. The co-defendant, the guy that actually shot Mr. Ebenezer, got 75 years in prison, but she's serving damn near a whole sentence for it. So there's a couple things to highlight. That's the story, and I want you guys to be able to read about that in the writing. But what I want to talk about is more, I guess, like the field notes part of it, and the things that I've had to reckon with while writing this. One of the things that I never anticipated while doing this, of all the things that could go wrong while you're writing a story, having one of your sources pass away is not something that I expected. But in the middle, she was affectionately known as Bear. She was one of the women that was incarcerated with Erica and was helped by Erica to get her own freedom. And then as she got out, has been advocating for Erica. But I think in July, I got a phone call from Bear's daughter, who you can see, or sorry, from Erica's daughter on the left, saying that Bear had passed away. And I couldn't shake this feeling of, I didn't know whether it was natural causes, I didn't know if there was something else, but I couldn't shake this feeling of the things that she had dealt with as someone that had been incarcerated definitely led to her physical well-being and her untimely death. And there's like countless letters like this. This is from someone else. But there's countless letters like this that talk about what a model Erica has been for her peers. And Bear was one of those people that spoke really highly of her. And then there's other things that have been super difficult, like in the week before coming here was when I finally got approved to be on Erica's visitors list. Everything that I've done so far has been communicated via email, which takes multiple days because you basically write the email, you have to send it, someone has to read it before they can send it to Erica, and then it has to do the same thing coming back. And I finally got approved to go down and visit her, so just communication has been really, really slow. And if you think about one of the ways that people talk about incarceration is that it's meant to rehabilitate someone. Erica is someone that I think I have been very inspired by, regardless of her status as being incarcerated. I met her through working with like a religious bond fund, and her religious morals have never wavered, and though she is in a situation that I think is unfair, her own personal confidence and endless work to just help people around her continues going on. And one of the things that this reminds me of is the idea of like reconciliation or rehabilitative justice, which is something that I don't think we talk about a lot in our justice system. This is a letter from Tiara Williams, who was Corey Ebenezer's fiance. And I spent the last week trying to track her down to talk to her and to get her perspective on this, because all that she knows is that Erica was charged for the murder of her fiance. But she's never gotten the chance to really speak to Erica. Erica's not even allowed to respond to this letter because her case is active. But it's things like that that I've been thinking a lot about while writing this story, where it's like these principles of justice that we're told we're upholding kind of fall apart at the seams when you really dig into it. But yeah, I mean, I think the thing that I want to leave you guys with is that the best thing about writing the story for me has been being able to harbor that relationship with Erica and learn from her courage and also a lot of her advocacy. It's taught me a lot, especially as someone going into medical school, about the challenges that incarcerated people face, as often a population that is forgotten otherwise by the medical institution, and so many others. Thanks.
Can we start off with questions that you might have for each other? Yeah, Iqra, go ahead.
Yeah, I had a question for Zane. How did you gain access in Cameroon? I know it can be a bit problematic.
Do you mean access to sources, like just in general?
To the country.
Oh, to the country.
Yeah.
The visa process was annoying, but not too prohibitive. I studied abroad there the semester before, so that was helpful. As far as like being a journalist in Cameroon, I was a little concerned. I took some steps to protect my sources and myself. But frankly, being an American citizen is like the most powerful status you can have as a journalist, really, or as anything around the world. And so I even had warlords tell me, like, don't worry, man, you're American, which was comforting for me, but not so much for anybody else. So yeah.
Other questions from our table? All right. Let me know if you have any. I will go to the audience. Nyla, I'll start with you.
Thanks, Libby, and thank all of you for your presentations. So I have a question for Natalia. I'm wondering, you mentioned your positionality as an American person, like though you have Latinx and Afro-Latina ancestry, like our positionality as Americans meant you brought a more of a Western way of exploring that you had to get rid of. And so I'm wondering, how did you do that, and how did you notice it was happening? And I have the interest because I'll be in a similar position down the line. So yeah, just your thoughts on that.
That is such a great question, and thank you for asking. I think when I first realized it, I was examining it from an institutional and examining the wrong forces of power that I guess maybe we would go about that here in the States. But there, there's a lot of corruption, data is incorrect. I had to go by a lot of anecdotal evidence. I had to take a more grassroots approach and really make sure that the people that I was taking notes from and taking evidence from were people that were actually experiencing the issues or were connected directly to the communities experiencing the issues, and not just like spokespeople that everyone kind of speaks to because they're the most popular in social media. And so that's kind of how I went about that. Thank you for asking.
Other questions? Yeah, Paula.
Your presentations were all great. Zane, my question is to you. Poignant topic as a Cameroonian, but I think I'm interested, or the crisis, it's been interesting to see the influence and engagement of the diaspora. You talk about the phony separatist or whatever. So my question is, can you speak to the balance of diaspora versus local in social media and sentiments, either pro-government or separatist, and how you saw that play out?
Yeah, that's a huge question. I realized the impact of the diaspora, I mean, on both sides of the conflict. That second story is about like two Anglophones, one who's pro-separatist, one who's pro-government, and they each live in the UK, and they both are highly influential in this conflict. And these WhatsApp groups, I mean, so much of the movement and so much of the coordination has lived on Facebook and WhatsApp. So we have Mark Zuckerberg to thank for lots of this. But I would love to explore further, like how it divides between Francophone and Anglophone, because there are wealthy expats in both camps. And not all Francophones are pro-government, not all Anglophones are pro-separatist, as you very well know. And so I don't know how that breakdown looks, but it's a really interesting question. Thank you for asking.
My question is for Vildana. How how did you take steps to both protect your own safety and the safety of your sources when you were dealing with a topic that is illegal in Russia?
When I was going to Russia, obviously I didn't disclose to anyone except for my sources what am I doing in Russia. Even most of my friends thought that it was just a trip to visit family and friends. And only after I was done with project, I just let them know. Regarding my sources, so you see, it was like I got on the last train because it was semi-illegal because the bill wasn't signed yet by the president. So it was hard to find any organizations on LGBTQ because they start closing them down. But I was able to find some people, and actually the only time I had to send out a paperwork that I'm working for Pulitzer Center, that I'm a Pulitzer Center fellow, it was with one of the activists I got an interview with. Yeah, so as of right now, I don't think that anybody would given out interviews. I think that's it, yeah. Thank you, thanks.
Any other audience questions? Let me know if I'm missing you. I personally feel like a couple of your topics likely dealt with, the need to protect your sources, to protect yourself. So would anyone else be interested in expanding on that question that Maddie asked?
Yeah, I mean, for me, initially I wanted to do like a short doc when I was going there, but there's an incident that happened and 2 New York Times journalists were deported, I think a month before I went. And I think the local journalist that they were working with was jailed and there was a court case going on. So I remember working with this journalist back in Zimbabwe, and at first he wanted to bail out, but I just kept going on and telling him we're gonna be safe and stuff like that. And it was just a lot of taking a lot of security measures and protocols, using VPNs, and just sometimes I would do interviews in the car or just go somewhere outside, far away where people won't notice me, because I mean, it's such a sensitive topic, and I feel not even thinking about myself, you need to protect your sources, and you have to keep that at the back of your mind. So just a lot of things, yeah, just making sure that because we would travel for 6 hours, how planning that all out, and yeah, just be looking at the back of your shoulder every time. So a lot of that.
I had kind of a tangential answer to that. I'm reflecting on your question and thinking about, I didn't have to do much protecting of my sources, because I think it's speaking to people that either are incarcerated or have been incarcerated are already hidden from public view almost, where it's no one is really looking to harm them anymore other than the system that they've already been subject to. I remember when I was sitting in on the decision hearing for Erica's post-conviction petition, I was sitting next to this woman named Yesenia, and I noticed she was getting visibly agitated, kind of shaking, and it was because they were going to reveal the decision, and instantly everyone knew exactly what the decision was going to be because they had 4 policemen line the back of the room. And as someone that had previously been incarcerated, she knew exactly what was coming. But yeah, that was one of the things that kind of just blew me away working on this story, is how you can have such a large part of the US population almost so in front and visible, but also so far behind. And the other quick thing that I'll say is I think there was a degree of hesitation for me starting work on this story. I don't think I told my parents like what I was doing as much because I knew if I mentioned jail or prison or whatever, they were going to get worried about me. But that's what I realized kind of going into it is like, it's almost like this thing that's created in your head to be so scary and so villainous, but in reality it's just people that have been dealt a bad card, like a bad set of cards, and you're going in to talk to them, and there are protections that you can have. Yeah.
Well, thank you all so much. Let's give our panelists a round of applause.